Hi, good day. My name is Rizami Manu, and we're here to discuss to you the Constitution of the Philippines. What is actually the Constitution of the Philippines? Here's the overview for you to know. The Constitution of the Philippines is the supreme law of the country and is the basis for all other laws. It establishes a democratic and republican government and includes a Bill of Rights, a separation of powers, and other key features. Government structure organized the government into three branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. The legislative branch is made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives. The executive branch is led by the President, and the judicial branch includes the Supreme Court and other law. Check the balances. Establish a system of check and balances to prevent the government from abusing its power. Bill of Rights includes a Bill of Rights that guarantees civil and political rights. State policies that guide the government on issues such as social justice, education, health, and environmental rights. Separation of church and state. This constitution established the separation of church and state. Foreign policy. Established that the states will pursue an independent foreign policy, and it has a 6 constitution of law.
I am Leslie Ann A. Lopez. Today, we'll be discussing a significant moment in Philippine history, the Biak na Bato Constitution of 1897. This important document shows the Filipinos' desire for self-government and freedom from Spain. Together, let's explore the provisions and significance of the Biak na Bato Constitution and how it shaped our history. So, this is the continuation of the report of Ms. Manera, the Constitution of Biak na Bato of 1897. The Constitution of Biak na Bato was the provisionary constitution of the Philippine Republic during the Philippine Revolution and was promulgated by the Philippine Revolutionary Government on November 1, 1897. So, this constitution, which is the Constitution of Biak na Bato, was the provisionary constitution of the Philippines during the Philippine Revolution. So, ito ay nilagdaan ng revolutionary government noong November 1, 1897. Emilio Aguinaldo established his headquarters in Biak na Bato in Bulacan Province. The news immediately spread through the country, and the revolution missionaries were once more in high spirit. So one of the general, which is General Elarnera, who was in Nueva Ecija, declared his support for Aguinaldo's in July 1897. The Constitution borrowed from Cuba was written by Isabela Artacho and Felix Ferrer in Spanish, and later on translated into Tagalog. So this concept was borrowed into Spanish writer, which is Isabela Artacho and Felix Ferrer. So it was originally written in Spanish, but later on it was being borrowed by Filipino people and it was translated into Tagalog. The organ of the government under the Constitution were the Supreme Council. The Supreme Council, which was vested with the power of the Republic, headed by the President and 4 department secretaries: the Interior, Foreign Affairs, Treasury, and War. So, in this Supreme Council, meron silang 5 members, which is consists of the President, Vice President, Secretary, Treasurer, and the representatives. So, sino nga ba sila? So, we're going to define them. They are the leaders: Emilio Aguinaldo, the President; Mariana Diaz, the Vice President; Antonio Montenegro, the Secretary; Baldomero Aguinaldo, the Treasurer; and Emiliano Regia de Dios, the representative. So, they are what we call the back of Biak na Bato. The next one is the Consejo Supremo de Garcia y Justicia, or the Supreme Council of Grace and Justice, was given authority to make decisions and affirm or disapprove the sentence rendered by the other courts and to dictate rules for the administration of justice. Itong Consejo Supremo de Garcia y Justicia, nag-focus naman sila sa pagbibigay ng tamang hustisya o tamang desisyon at pagbibigay ng kabuluhan sa mga ibang hukom na nagbibigay ng maling statement or maling hatol sa isang tao. Sila naman to yung nagfo-focus doon sa pagbibigay ng tamang hatol sa isang tao at pagbibigay ng tamang hustisya. So ito yung pangalawang Supreme Council na nagawa noong revolutionary, which is the Constitution of Biak na Bato. The third one is the Asamblea de Representantes or Assembly of the Representatives, which was to be convened after the revolution to create a new constitution and to elect a new council of government and representatives of the people. So, ang role naman ng Asamblea de Representantes is para nagkakaroon ng ugnayan or consultation yung lahat ng tao para pumili ng bagong constitution o gumawa ng bagong constitutional law. Or di kaya to elect a new council of government. So, it's more on communication and consultation peoples. The Constitution of Biak na Bato was never fully implemented since at first, the Pact of Biak na Bato was signed between the Spanish and the Philippine Revolutionary Army. Since itong Constitution of Biak na Bato, hindi siya fully na-implement sa buong Pilipinas. As this constitution was being signed only by the Pact of Biak na Bato, which is ruled by Emilio Aguinaldo. So hindi masyado siyang na-implement kasi nagkaroon pa rin ng conflict between the Spanish and the Philippine Revolutionary Army. The Biak na Bato Pact failed. The Philippine and Spaniard did not trust each other. So nagkaroon pa rin ng conflict ang Filipino at Spaniard as if they did not fully trusted each other. As a result, periodic clashes between the two groups still took places even after Aguinaldo's departure from the country. So nagpatuloy pa rin yung pakikipaglaban ng mga Filipino at Spaniard even though after that King Aguinaldo depart from the country. The Spaniard did not pay the entire agreed amount, continued to the Spanish-American War. So, naipasok sa constitution na ito is the rule. May rule tayo doon na sinusunod yung mga Spanish as if nung umalis si Aguinaldo sa country is bumalik sa dating gawin ang mga Spanish which is they continue killing Filipino people and then yung napagkasunduan na amount na dapat nilang bayaran sa Philippines ay hindi na nila sinunod at doon nagpatuloy yung war between the Filipino and Spanish people. So let's proceed in the primary source. Preamble of Biak na Bato Constitution. This Constitution of Biak na Bato was signed on November 1, 1897. The Biak na Bato Constitution provided for the establishment of a Supreme Council that will serve as the highest governing body of the Republic. It also outlined certain basic human rights such as freedom of the religion, freedom of the press, and the right to education. Emilio Aguinaldo and Mariano Trias were elected Supreme Council President and Vice President, respectively. The separation of the Philippines from the Spanish monarchy and their formation into an independent state with its own government called the Philippine Republic has been the end sought by the revolution in the existing war began on the 24th of August 1896. So, nakaisip ng paraan ng mga Pilipino na humiwalay sa pamumuno ng Spanish monarchy which is nagkaroon sila ng independent state with its own government. Nakabuo sila ng independent state na kanilang own government mismo na tinatawag nating Philippine Republic. And it has been dissolved by the revolution in the existing war began on 24th of August 1896. So at the end of that year is nakuha pa rin nila yung kagustuhan na humiwalay sa Spanish monarchy at magkaroon sila ng independent state. Yun yung mga pinapangarap ng Pilipino at that moment. Makabuo sila ng sarili nilang government which is nangyari naman, natupad naman. Which is yun yung tinatawag nating Philippine Republic. So that's all, thank you.
I'm here to explain what is Palolo's Constitution. Palolo's Constitution was the basic law of the first Philippine Republic. It is the first important Filipino document ever produced by the people's representatives. The first Philippine Constitution was drafted and adopted by the first Philippine Republic, which lasted from 1899 to 1901. It is anchored in democratic traditions that ultimately had their roots in American soil. It created Filipino state with government as popular, representative, and responsible, with three distinct branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Here's an example of the opening of the Malolos Congress at the Barry Swain Church, Malolos, Bulacan on September 15, 1898. Malolos Constitution, it was written by Felipe Calderon Iroca and Felipe Bencamino. as an alternative to a pair of a proposal to the Malolos Congress by Apolinario Mabini and Pedro Paterno. Following the declaration of independence from Spain on June 12, 1898, and transformation of the titular government and revolutionary government on June 23, the Malolos Congress election was held between June 23 and September 10. On September 15, 1898, the Revolutionary Congress convenes in Barrio Swing Church in Malolos with Federal Paterno as President and Gregorio as Araneta and as Vice President. On September 29, the June 12 Declaration of Independence was ratified. The Congress then decided drafted to the Constitution decision of the post by the Apolinario Mabini, the Prime Minister of the Revolutionary Government. The resulting Malolos Constitution was ratified on November 29, 1898, signed into law December 23, approved on January 20, 1899, sanctioned by President Emilio Aguinaldo on January 21, and promulgated on January 22. How did the Malolos Constitution start? Following the declaration of independence from Spain on June 12, 1898, by the revolutionary government, a congress was opened in Malolos, Bulacan province on September 15, 1898 to draw up a constitution to the First Philippine Republic. The basilica at Barasan was filled with delegates and spectators. Malolos Constitution was especially provided for safeguards against abuses and enumerated the national and individual rights not only of the Filipinos and of the aliens. The document states that the people have sovereignty in state's basic civil rights, separated church from the state, and called for the creation of an assembly of representatives which would not act as the legislation. It also calls for a parliamentary republic as form of government with the president elected for a term of 4 years by a majority of the assembly. Here is the legislation major Declaration of Independence on June 12, 1898 and was ratified on September 29, 1898. Declaration of War against the United States enacted and ratified on June 2, 1899. And Malolos Constitution was promulgated on January 22, 1899 and approved on June 21, 1899. Example of the capital of the Philippine Republic at Malolos, erected in 1895. Here's another example of the proclamation of Emilio Aguinaldo's leaders of revolutionary government at Malolos on January 23, 1899. Malolos Constitution was firmly established with its proclamation on January 21, 1899 in Malolos, Bulacan. It endured until the capture of the President Emilio Aguinaldo by the American forces on March 23, 1901, in Palanan, Isabela, which effectively dissolved the First Republic. The Constitution as a whole is a monument to the capacity of the Filipinos to chart their own course along democratic lines. In a period of storm, and it symbolized the ideals of the people who had emerged from the dark ages into the light of reason.
What is the 1935 Constitution? The 1935 Constitution was like the rulebook or the blueprint for how the Philippines would be governed when it was preparing to become independent from the United States. It set up the structure of the government and the rights of the people during the Commonwealth period, which was a transitional time before full independence. So, here are the key parts of the Constitution. First is the beginning or the preamble. Think of the preamble as the introduction. It talks about what the people of the Philippines wanted for the country, like justice, freedom, and peace. And then the territory. The Constitution defined what areas were considered part of the Philippines based on agreements made in the past with other countries. And then the principles and rights. Principles, it declared that the Philippines is a republic, meaning it runs by elected representatives and leaders. And then the Bill of Rights, this section was super important because it listed all the basic rights that people have, like freedom of speech, religion, and protection against unfair treatment. And then the citizenship and voting. Citizenship explained who was considered a Filipino citizen. This included people who were already citizens and children of Filipino parents. And then the voting. Originally, only men could vote, but it allowed for women to vote if enough of them agreed in a special vote. And then the government structure, which is the legislative. This is the part of the government that makes laws. Initially, there was just one big assembly, but it was later changed to include two groups similar to the US Congress. And then second is the executive. The president was in charge of this branch, similar to how the president of the United States leads the executive branch there. Lastly, this is judicial. This branch interprets the laws and is led by the Supreme Court. Changing the Constitution. The Constitution included ways to change itself, which required a lot of agreement from the government leaders to ensure any changes were well thought out. Why it mattered? The 1935 Constitution was a big step towards the Philippines becoming its own country. It set up the foundations for democracy and governance that influenced how the country was run even after it became fully independent. It was like setting the stage for a new chapter in the country's history.
My name is Evangeline Edilio, your 1973 Constitution reporter. President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was the first president to be re-elected because of his desires of remaining in power beyond his legal tenure. He declared martial law in 1972, just before his last term. He then manipulated an ongoing constitutional convention and caused the drafting of a new constitution, which is the 1973 Constitution. The Constitution, which is allowed him to rule by decree until 1978, when the presidential system of the 1935 Constitution was replaced with a parliamentary one. Mantakin nyo, 21 years siyang naging presidente ng Philippines. Dumako tayo sa 5 importanteng features ng 1973 Constitution. First was the content of the Constitution. It is composed of a preamble and 17 articles that provides for the shift from presidential to parliamentary system of government. Its constitution was a deviation from the Philippines' commitment to democratic ideals. Former President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. euphemistically called the 1973 Constitution was authoritarian nature, yet democratic in practice. And like the 1935 Constitution, the 1973 Constitution have a mandatory process and elaborate Bill of Rights. Important laws is still used up to this day, or yung mga importanteng batas na sinusunod pa rin natin hanggang sa ngayon. Kung ikukumpara natin ang 1973 Constitution at 1987 Constitution, magkapareho sila, pero mas elaborated ang 1987 Constitution na siyang sinusunod natin sa kasalukuyan. Although meron pa rin naman yung batas na or meron pa rin yung nakalakip sa 1973 Constitution na sinusunod pa rin natin hanggang ngayon. Mas elaborated nga lang sa 1987 Constitution. So, balik tayo sa 1973 Constitution. Ang ilan sa mga ito ay ang Article 1, National Territory, which is, example nito yung West Philippine Sea na inaangkin ng China. Article 2, Declaration of Principles and State Policies. Example nito is yung Agrarian Reform Policies. Article 3, Bill of Rights. Article 4, Bill of Rights of the 1973 Philippine Constitution. Article 4 says that no law shall be passed abridging of the freedom of speech, of expression, or of the press for the right of the people peaceably to assemble in petition the government for the redress of grievances. Presidential decree. A decree is a rule of law usually issued by a head of state such as the president. It was a former president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Sr., who innovated the idea of presidential decrees with the proclamation of martial law. Isa sa mga importanteng decree ay ang Presidential Decree No. 86, Series of 1972 Constitution. Also, ang mga importanteng batas na sinusunod pa rin natin sa kasalukuyan. Kung ikukumpara ang 1973 Constitution at 1987 Constitution, ay magkapareho pero mas elaborated ang 1987 Constitution na siyang sinusunod natin sa kasalukuyan. Ang ilan sa mga ito ay ang Article 1, National Territory. National Territory. Example nito is yung West Philippine Sea na sinasabi ng China na South China Sea. Pero guys, alam naman natin kung ano yung totoo. Nasa atin yung West Philippine Sea. Article 2, Declaration of Principles and State Policies. Ito yung katulad lang ng agrarian reform policies. And then, Article 3, Bill of Rights. Article 4, Bill of Rights of the 1973 Philippine Constitution. Article 4 says that no law shall be passed abridging the freedom of speech, of expression, or of the press for the right of the people peaceably to assemble in petition the government for the redress of grievances. Presidential Decree. A decree is a rule of law usually issued by a head of state such as the president. It was a former president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Sr., who innovated the idea of presidential decrees with the proclamation of martial law. Isa sa mga importanteng decree ay ang Presidential Decree No. 86, Series of 1972, also known as Creating Barangay or Citizens' Assemblies. Now, the barangay is considered as the basic unit of the government and is recognized in the 1987 Constitution. Sa panghalimbawa ay ang Presidential Decree 1177, known as the Budget Reform Decree, which is commonly known as the pork barrel and the source of the greatest scam, whose mastermind was said to be Mrs. Janet Lim Napoles. Establish a Prime Minister and President. Sa kauna-unahang pagkakataon sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas, ang parliamentary government established a Prime Minister and the President both were elected by the National Assembly. Next is legislative powers, vested in a Congress which is divided into two houses, the Senate and the House of the Representatives, in the unicameral National Assembly in 1973 Constitution. Legislative power was given to the President in enacting laws compulsory to avoid the uprising of New People's Army. Also, the Justice of the Heart were invited by the President alone. Without the consent approval or recommendation of any body or officials. Next is parity rights. According to Gabriel John D. Richards' study, President Manuel Rojas has believed na ang Pilipinas is need ng support from the Americans to be able to restore its economy. That is why the Liberal Party under Manuel Rojas favored the grant of parity rights, but President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. terminated parity rights in between Americans and Filipinos. Next is emphasize duties and obligations. There is an emphasis of the duties and obligations of citizens, especially in giving military services and joining military forces. Stated in Article 5 of the 1973 Constitution, of the citizen to be loyal to the Republic and to honor the Philippine flag, to defend the state and contribute to its development and welfare, to uphold the Constitution and obey the laws, and to cooperate with the duly constituted authorities in the attainment and preservation of a just and orderly society. Dumako naman tayo sa suffrage, the right to vote in political election. Ikaw, may karapatan ka na bang bumoto? Noong 1935 Constitution, natatanging ang mga male citizens with at least 21 years of age at kayang magbasa at magsulat lang ang maaaring bumoto. Ngunit binago ito sa Article 6 ng 1973 Constitution na ang mga mamamayan ng Pilipinas na at least 18 years old ay maaaring bumoto or may karapatang bumoto. There is no literacy or property requirement or required, but he or she should be resident for at least 1 year and 6 months in the place he or she proposed to vote. So it means mahirap ka man o mayaman, may sinasaka o wala, may pinag-aralan o wala, basta nabit mo yung qualification and then you can vote. At ito yung ay sinusunod natin sa kasalukuyang panahon. Article 3, which talks about citizenship. Sino ang mga mamamayan ng Pilipinas? Well understood naman na if my both parents are Filipino citizens, then Filipino ako. Pero, paano kung nakapag-asawa or nag-asawa ako ng ibang lahi na permanenteng residente dito sa Pilipinas, ngunit walang citizenship or ang ibang tawag sa kanila ay alien? Well, Pilipino pa rin ako dahil batay sa Article 3, Section 2 ng 1973 Constitution, that the female citizens of the Philippines who marry an alien shall retain her Philippine citizenship at na-develop ito noong 1987 Constitution. Paano naman kung ganito ang sitwasyon? Nakapag-asawa ako ng Amerikano at nagbunga ang aming pagmamahalan. Ano ang pagkamamamayan ng aming supling or anak? Ayon sa Article 3, Section 1 ng 1973 Constitution, those whose fathers or mothers are citizens of the Philippines are considered Filipino citizens. So, Filipino ang anak namin. Do magbibigay ng paperworks para ma-proof na isa siyang Pilipino, sa madaling sabi, pwede lang ang dual citizens or sa madaling sabi, dual citizens are considered Filipino as long as one of his or her parents ay Filipino citizen At ito ay sinunod pa rin natin sa kasalukuyang panahon.
In a country that has witnessed over a century of struggle for freedom, the Philippines stands as a testament to resiliency, unity, and democracy. Today, we explore over one of its most vital landmarks in modern history, the 1987 Philippine Constitution. Before the 1987 Constitution, the Philippines endured decades of political turbulence, from the regime of President Ferdinand Marcos, who declared martial law in 1972. The nation faced human rights abuses, curtailment of freedom, and widespread corruption. But in 1986, the Filipino people rose up in a peaceful revolution, the People Power. The regime of Ferdinand Marcos came to an end, and the nation sets its sights on rebuilding its democratic institutions. Good day everyone, my name is Mia Janine Palisok from BSHM2H, and today we are going to talk about the 1987 Constitution of the Philippines. The Constitution is the highest law in the country. It serves as the foundation for how the government works and how the rights of people are protected. It was created after the 1986 People Power Revolution, which ended years of dictatorship. The Constitution ensures that democracy, justice, and freedom are upheld in the Philippines. So why is the 1987 Philippine Constitution created? Before 1987, the Philippines experienced years of abuse and authoritarian rule under martial law. The Constitution was made to make sure these abuses never happen again. It protects the rights of the people and limits the power of the government. The 1987 Philippine Constitution is a beacon of democratic values. It consists of 18 articles and establishes the fundamental framework for governance. Among its key provisions are the preamble. It begins with the words, "We, the sovereign Filipino people, imploring the aid of Almighty God in order to build a just and humane society," encapsulating the people's aspiration for democracy, justice, and equality. The Bill of Rights. This section guarantees fundamental freedoms such as freedom of speech, assembly, religion, and the press. It also prohibits torture, forced confessions, and arbitrary detentions. The separation of powers. The Constitution clearly delineates the powers of the three branches of the government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, ensuring a system of checks and balances. National economy and patrimony. This section talks about how the country's resources should be used for the benefit of Filipinos, focusing on fair economic growth, protecting natural resources, and encouraging local businesses. Next is social justice and human rights. It aims to protect the welfare of the poor and marginalized, promote equal opportunities for all, and provide basic social services like education and healthcare. Another one is public officials. It sets rules for how public officials should behave, including how they are elected, how long they can serve, and how they can be removed if they break the law. Amendments and revisions. This explains how the Constitution can be changed if needed, but the process is designed to be careful and thorough to protect the country's stability. These provisions work together to create a fair, just, and democratic government that serves the needs of the Filipinos.
While the 1987 Constitution has been instrumental in guiding the country towards democracy, its true power lies in the hands of the people. It is a living document, one that must be continually protected and upheld by every Filipino. In the words of the Constitution itself, we, the sovereign Filipino people, hold the power to shape the future.